One of the most common questions that I get asked about bassoon reeds is why are the two blades of my reed offset from each other or slipped or misaligned or however you want to say it. And usually it looks like this, where one blade of the reed is just slightly misaligned from the other blade. If this is the bottom blade and this is the top blade, they're just slipped slightly apart. They're not totally equal or even. And because I get this question so much about what's wrong with my reed, what's going on, how do I fix it, I wanted to make a dedicated video to this topic, and maybe I'll just link to this video next time somebody asks me this question. So stick around to find out what this is, why it's happening, and if it really needs it, how you could possibly fix this. My name is Dr. Natalie Law, and I'm a professional bassoonist and teacher, and I love helping people learn how to play the bassoon, improve your skills, and just feel confident playing this instrument. So if that's a topic of interest to you, please make sure you're subscribed to the channel, give me a thumbs up, and comment any questions or thoughts that you have about this topic or other bassoon topics. It not only helps me and the channel out, but it also helps the algorithm find other people who might benefit from this type of information. So first I want to talk about what is actually happening with the reed when you notice this on one of your reeds. Now, the reed may come to you like this if you are buying a reed and it comes like this, or it may be something that happens over time. And basically, just in really simple terms, if you haven't already kind of figured it out, one blade of the reed, if this is the bottom blade and this is the top blade, is offset from each other. And I want to alleviate any concerns right up front and say that this is not something that will drastically affect the playability of the reed. It's not something that really necessarily needs to be fixed, although there is a way that you can fix it if you want to. But you generally don't need to be concerned about it, especially if it's only just slightly off. Now, if the blades are slipped really far off, like basically half on, half off, that's going to be difficult to play because essentially then there's only one small column for your air to go through, and it makes the reed more resistant and more difficult to control. Certainly there are variations on this, but generally most slip blades aren't a big deal. But I want to explain what's happening so you understand why this might be happening to your reed. In some reed styles, this is actually something that is intentional. The way the reed is formed, it may eventually lead to the blade slipping. Not all reeds are made with that sort of intention. I've mentioned before that there's lots of different ways to make reeds and lots of different philosophies and approaches to reed making. And so if you get reeds from 3 different people, you're going to notice that those reeds look, sound, and feel very differently usually. It's just because there's all these different methods and not everybody has the same approach or does all the same steps. And I can explain this because it's something that I do in my reed making and something that kind of sometimes happens naturally to reeds regardless of the reed making process. So this is sometimes called intentional slip. And what that does is it prevents the reed from getting double tucked. So this is kind of best shown in my beginning reed making video, part 1, where you're forming a piece of cane like this and soaking it and folding it in half, and it eventually becomes what's called a reed blank. And in that process of folding the cane in half, generally you want to avoid folding the cane so it's like straight on, exactly lined up, because that can actually lead to the reed being double tucked by accident, which means that one blade would be sort of sucked under the rails of the other blade. So the rails are the sides of the blades, and one would be sort of tucked underneath on both edges of the blade. And what that does is that makes the top blade in this example really rounded because it's got so much pressure on it. And then it makes the bottom blade really flat because it doesn't have any sort of equalized tension with the other reed on it. And eventually, when you look at the tip of a reed that's been double tucked, one blade will be very curved and one will be very straight. And that can be an indication that this is happening. And it makes the reed unbalanced because there's a lot of tension on one blade and not a lot of tension on the other blade. And no matter what type of reed making style you may be playing on or making, balance is always the key in reed making. You want the two blades to be balanced and equal to each other so that you have more control and it's easier to play. To prevent a reed from being double tucked, some reed makers like myself will actually offset the butt of the cane, so they're not perfectly lined up, but they're just slightly not lined up, and you can see that in that reed making video. And the other part of this is it prevents the double tucking, but you have to remember that cane, which is the type of wood that reeds are made of, it's an organic material that's very susceptible to its environment, climate, temperature, elevation. Drastic changes in any of those variables all really affect reeds. So bassoon cane, just like any type of wood or plant, has a lot of fibers running through it, running vertically through it, if you were to look at it up close. And those fibers sometimes have twists or warps, or they're not all the same size or distance apart, or there's other variables that play into how the structure of that cane. That can cause the cane to want to fold off to one side because of just how it's structured. For example, I will notice when I fold the two pieces together, if the cane wants to go off to one side, I will actually put it off to the other side so that it's going against what it naturally wants to do. So it prevents that sort of motion that it naturally wants to do, which will ultimately affect the end result reed, because it'll always be wanting to push in that direction, which can just cause, the blade slipping in itself. But it also prevents that double tucking that I just talked about. So there is a method to the madness. It may seem a little odd. Don't you want the blades completely 100% lined up? Yes, that's the ideal, but it can present its own host of problems if the blades are perfectly lined up when one blade gets tucked under the other one. So if it comes to your reed and you're purchasing a reed from somewhere, it could be the blades are slightly offset, or they become slightly offset over time because the reed is shifting as it's broken in, as it's soaked and thawed and gone through the breaking in process. Your reed may have a tendency, just because of the way the fibers of the cane are going, to want to slip apart because that's just its natural tendencies, or the reed maker just slipped it just enough and it's just offset enough because the reed maker wanted to prevent the reed from getting slipped in the other direction really drastically like it wanted to, or they're preventing the reed from getting double tucked, which would be very bad. Then the reed is basically trash, and it's very difficult / slightly impossible to fix that if a reed is double tucked. Like it's a reed life ending problem if you have a reed that's double tucked, usually. So a lot of that information, especially if you haven't done any reed making or reed adjusting, might seem a little confusing or it doesn't really make sense, and that's okay. But I wanted to explain to you the thought process behind why that's happening, and just to show you that yes, in some cases it's intentional, and also just cane moves over time. So that was a very in-depth answer for why the blades of your reed might be slipped apart. And I just want you to be able to understand all of that, so even if you're not really into reed making, just so that you know why this might be happening to your reed. But overall, it's not something you need to worry about. You really don't need to do anything to fix it. It's really not a big deal. It's more of a cosmetic issue than it is an actual playability issue. Now, if you are into reed making or reed adjusting and the slip on the reed is really drastic, or you do feel like it's bothering the playability of the reed, you can fully soak the cane and take off the first and second wires and sort of actually manually place the blades back so they're more aligned, and then put the wires back on the reed. So it is possible to change this, but I have found when I've tried to do this that the reeds still want to slip because they've already been formed to be that way. And once they've formed, it's really hard, and the reed will always want to be pushing back in that direction. So you might be able to temporarily fix it or maybe alleviate the problem a little bit, but it's not really a fixable problem. And if it's not bothering anything in your playing, I really wouldn't worry about it. So I hope this was helpful in explaining what's happening to your reeds and why this is happening, and hopefully alleviates any concerns that you might have about your reeds slipping. It's just a normal thing that happens, and it's really nothing that you need to be worried about. If this video was helpful for you, please make sure that you give me a thumbs up and make sure you're subscribed to the channel, and let me know any questions that you have about this topic.